What's up, guys? Today we're talking to former NASA engineer turned entrepreneur, Tyler Ryan, the wizard behind LTV Numbers, a SaaS company that helps online businesses learn about how much they can spend to acquire their customers. Tyler's analyzed over 1 billion transactions, $720 million worth of sales data from more than 5.5 million customers. So you could say he's just a bit of a numbers guy. If you are interested in the journey of how someone goes from being a NASA engineer to leaving what most consider a career job into being a software entrepreneur, this is the episode for you. I'm Johnny Page.
I'm Matt Verleck.
And this is the SaaS Academy Podcast. Welcome to the SaaS Academy Podcast, dude. I'm super excited to have you on. And I feel like when we first met at an event, I knew in the first 5 minutes that we were going to be friends because you're a big LA sports fan.
Oh, big time.
It's easy to get along with someone who's got that shared passion for the LA sports team. So I'm excited, man. We got a lot of great stuff to dive into today, but you have a former past life that prior to being a SaaS founder, that I think it's probably one of the most unique. Like Matt goes firefighter to SaaS founder.
Good one.
This is equally as unique. You used to be an engineer for NASA. Can you explain how? Well, first off, let's start with how do you even get a job like that, and then we'll figure out how the heck it led to SaaS. But tell us about your time as an engineer.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, I got into college already knowing that I wanted to start a company of some kind. And it just so happened that NASA was the perfect stepping stone for me along the way. And I'll connect some of those dots here. So I just always had that feeling that I wanted to start my own company. I mean, from the time I was even in high school, I just always had that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, wanting to do things my own way, innovate on things, question why things are done the way that they are. So when I got to college, I was really looking for some opportunities to develop a skill set that I knew would be foundational for building a company in the future. But I really didn't know what that skill set was going to be. I just was keeping my eyes open, looking for that opportunity. And I was fortunate enough to know a guy that I played high school baseball with. And his dad worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is out here in Pasadena. So it's around the LA area. And when I came back, when I was in college to watch my high school team play a game, I ended up sitting next to this guy. And he said, "Hey, you ever thought about doing an internship at NASA?" And I was like, my entrepreneur brain was like, this is one of those moments. This is one of those moments. Because I had no plans of any sort of internship. And I just said, no, but I would love to. Let's see where this goes. And that ended up being the decision. Me just saying yes, and let's see where this goes. That led me to learn software engineering. Because at that point in time, I had never coded before. I never really got into programming, never even really considered it. But that ended up being what I realized over the next few years was the foundational skill. Because when I got into it, I realized that with this skill, I can kind of do anything. Right? I can build anything. I can solve any problem. And because I already had that sort of engineer mindset, I was studying physics in college, it kind of just all clicked into place for me. And once I started developing my skill set as a software engineer, I started the side projects, building a baseball stats app just for fun, building a document search tool to help me with my, my college research, just on and on and on, just started building stuff for the sake of it. And by the time I graduated, I had a job waiting for me at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I used that as a place to really learn what it takes to build good software and get into a team environment and see how do these guys do it who are way, way above me. And I'm just coming in as this new guy that doesn't really know all that much about how software is really developed. So even though my long-term goal was never to be a NASA software engineer, it was about identifying what that track and that environment could do to help me develop those foundational skills. And then when I finally had the idea that I wanted to go forward with and start my first company, I had already built up the foundation to make that leap and feel pretty good about it.
Awesome. Is it I've talked to a lot of engineers that they're typically two different breeds, right? You've got like the startup, I love to build from 0 to 1. I love tinkering around. And then you have the more like corporate, long, it's just slower, lots of hoops you got to jump through. Kind of different, a lot less creativity, a lot more structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you feel that at NASA and just feel like, hey, is that part of what led to, hey, I got to go start and do my own thing? Or how long was it the lab that you felt like was building the skill sets that were going to be leveraged in an entrepreneurial, avenue in the future?
I pretty quickly realized that long term, this was an environment that I could only stay in for a relatively short period of time. Because to your point, pretty much everyone that works there is sort of that long term, use the best practices, kind of do things the way that they've always been done. And it's understandable because that environment is like as risk averse as it gets. Yeah. Right. We're still using the technology from the 1970s on a lot of these spacecraft. So if it's not broken, don't fix it, But I came in with much more of the question everything mentality. So I found myself sort of butting heads with a lot of the conventional practices inside of the team. But it forced me really to learn what a best practice environment looks like so I could see where I wanted to diverge and do things differently. But I only lasted about a year full time there before I just said, I got to go.
Wow. What are one of the key things that you learned that you still think back to from your time as a NASA software engineer that you like that inform how you do things today?
100%. It's the idea of building clear requirements and a good architecture from the beginning. And this is one of these things where you do have to strike the balance, right? Of like move fast and break things, but also planning for the future and finding that middle ground. And what NASA does really, really well is they have such clear requirements and such an incredible planning process that 99.9% of the time, it's just going to work on the first try. So that's like the other end of the spectrum, right? Of so much of what we do as entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, a lot of the time, it's just like, I don't care at all if this works. Let's just get something and break it and then iterate, right? But with that said, you can still do a better job oftentimes of getting it right the first time from an architecture standpoint, especially when it comes to software, to prevent some of those, it's a year from now and here you are rewriting absolutely everything from the ground up. And so much of it could have been prevented if you just took not a year, right, but like a week or two of really planning. What are the requirements of the system today? What do I see the requirements being 6 months from now, a year from now, based on the vision that I have for the company today? And how can I do a little bit of that architecture planning up front so I don't do a bunch of unnecessary work later?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to ask you, dude, before we move on from the NASA phase of your world. So I'm a big old space nerd, right? Like my uncle worked on the LEM. He worked for Grumman. Even when I ran my first company, UpLaunch, we had a strategic plan for growing the company, and it was literally Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo for the three phases of the company growth. I'm going super nerd here, but I'd love to know, I'm really interested in just company cultures, right? And the modern day culture of NASA is one that I know very little about. So I'm curious, how does what I consider the glory days of NASA, right? Like the 1960s and the space race, how does that history impact the culture today? Is that something where you kind of get indoctrinated into what was achieved during that time period? Does it affect the work that goes on there, now in the, 2020s? How does that show up, or does it show up?
Man, that's a really good question. I think there's a natural honoring of the history of NASA in every project that gets done, because what might not be obvious to someone on the outside is, take for example the Mars rover that it was called the Curiosity rover, and it was landing on Mars at the time that I was working there in the early 2010s. That project took 10 years, and it was one of the most expensive projects in NASA history. Almost every single person that worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is 5,000 people, worked on that project. And to make something like that happen, where that many people touch a project like that, and have it work, what you're doing so much of the time is you're almost in awe of all of the past projects that were successful. And every individual subsystem engineer is like, well, we're going to pull this from that project, this from that project, this from that project. And so what happens is everyone kind of knows the entire history of what NASA's done. Because when you're in 2010 launching a rocket, you're still using the stuff from 1960 to build that in a way that you have very high confidence is going to be successful. So there's a lot of talk about, the way things were done 70 years ago, why they were done that way, and how we can still honor the spirit of that and the lessons learned at that time.
That's really interesting. What was the compartmentalization like, right? Because I can imagine with 5,000 people touching a project, you're working on a switch that touches a widget, that touches a subcomponent, that touches a component. You know what I mean? Like you're so far from the overarching thing. Like, I don't know, like what kind of, whatever you can talk about, like what kind of stuff did you work on? Like how dialed into the context of like the big mission were you? Because I think there's parallels to what we do in companies, especially as our companies grow, where, I might have my product hat on, or I might be worried about getting leads and marketing, and I might forget the mission of like, why the hell are we here? How are we serving our customers? Like, I imagine it's that times a million in an operation like NASA. So like, how do you solve for that? Like the mission sized view and also the view 2 inches from your face,
I mean, there really is a perfect parallel between running a company with departments and then, maybe even individual teams within that department, and the way that a place like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory operates. So there's these different sections that sit up at the top and then different divisions underneath, which you can kind of think of like, you got your customer success, you got your product development, and on and on and on, marketing, sales. And then within that, you have these different divisions. So if this is section like 200, then there's 210 and 220 and 230 and 240. And there really is this incredibly well thought out structure for how just all of those pieces fit together and fit underneath each other, because you need to have very clear communication and structure from the very, very front lines, right? The people that are actually doing the work inside each division, all the way up to like the chief of the lab. And so this comes back to what I alluded to in the beginning of the extent to which I say that they have a very clear requirements architecture. I mean, like we have that all the way zoomed out at the entire project level. And then we have the next level of detail below that, the next level of detail below that. And it keeps going and going and going and going all the way until you're at this particular subsystem engineer working on this particular component. What are the requirements for that thing? But then how does that requirement fit within the 20 requirements for that overall payload, right? Then how does that payload bubble up to the subsystem? Then how does that subsystem bubble up to the system? And then how does that bubble up to the overall objective of the mission? So any individual engineer knows exactly why their thing is important, what it needs to do, what the requirements are for it, and how it impacts the next level of abstraction above them. So everyone always knows what they're doing and why at all times. Super important.
Love it. So basically, for anyone out there trying to figure out where to find your technical co-founder, just go to the Jet Propulsion Lab. It's probably a good spot. some brains bouncing around in there who know how to organize a project.
No doubt, man. I mean, there's incredible engineers there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
They really are.
Well, Ryan, here, I want to get, God, I just did it again, dude. Your last name's jacking me up. You're jacking me up. So Tyler, here's where I want to go for the rest of the conversation. I want to take the listeners through how you validate, like you were tinkering, building lots of different product. How do you land on LTV numbers? So I want to go through sort of the origin story of getting the company off the ground. And then for those listening, what I want you to know about Tyler and his time from Matt and I met Tyler about a year ago now.
But over a year
one of our
ago.
events was the first time we got to hang out in person. And I think I told you in that first conversation, I was like, dude, you are going to win. Like at the time, the company was like pretty early. Like it was, you're one of the earlier stage companies in there. And there's just, you have a way of thinking. And part of it, I think, comes from, we just got to hear where the source is from, like the systems oriented mindset to how you're building the business. I knew in a 5-minute conversation, whether it was LTV numbers or another product, you're going to be a successful entrepreneur. You just talk to enough and you can see it. So for those listening, I want you to clue in, because Tyler has a way of thinking that if you will pattern match, your chances of success go up significantly. So let's talk about the origin story. Let's talk about why LTV numbers, what's the problem that you guys are solving. And then I want to talk about where you're focused moving forward. Like, what is the future of the product and the company building side of what you're doing. So let's start with, how do you get from your tinkering, you start to feel the pace of learning diminishing at NASA and the urgency to go build something else increasing? Talk us through the transition and put us on a timeline, if you don't mind. Like, where are we at? Like, what year are we at? And how long ago was this?
Okay. So I have almost somewhat of like a mental framework around how I have moved through my career, because it really has been pretty intentional from the beginning. And it really stems from not falling into what is called the perfect pick fallacy, which is this idea that you need to know exactly what you want to do from the beginning. Because I really didn't. And I want to stress that it's not like I had this business background. I mean, I was a pure engineer. And when I say that, I mean like a pure engineer with no business experience. It's not like I had a family with a ton of business experience. Like, none of it. I didn't know the first thing about starting a company. So to me, all that mattered was just being directionally correct. And in the beginning, you know the least, right? You don't know what you want to do. You don't know how you want to do it, most likely. So to me, the first directionally correct step was to just start anything, any company. Doesn't even matter what it is. Because I know that if I do that, it's going to throw me into a new environment. It's going to throw me into a new set of learnings. It's going to show me a bunch of stuff that before were unknown unknowns that I can now start to demystify. And that will just move me in the right direction, because then I'll be more informed for the next pick, right? And make that directionally correct, but with a little bit more of a narrow lens, right? So my first directionally correct pick was, I'm currently a full-time employee. I've saved up enough money in my bank account to survive for like 2 years, even if I don't make $1. So I'm just going to go all in, make the leap, and see what happens. And this was back in 2017.
Tyler, how old were you when you did this? Like, what was your stage of life there?
Like 23.
Okay, cool.
23. Yeah. And, I was living at my parents' house while I was working at NASA, just trying to save every dollar I could, because I wanted to have that runway to be able to just make this leap. Worst case scenario, I just go get another engineering job. There's like really not that much of a risk. The worst case scenario, honestly, not even really that bad. So to me, it was like, let's just do it, see what happens. So I made the leap on my first company. And to give you an idea of what it was a document search technology that was designed to help someone find a piece of information in a large library of documents. You can see where I might have gotten some inspiration from that, right? Being at JPL. I talked about the huge requirements documents and everything. I mean, that right there was a real problem. It's clear if I'm operating in this tiny little section, but if I need to find like someone else's requirements or some other information, it was a really, really big challenge. So to the point about just being directionally correct, did I think that a document search company was going to change the world and become like my $100 million company I was going to work on for the rest of my life? Not a chance, right? But I was okay with that, because it wasn't about that, right? It was about putting myself in the ring so that I could then realize, wow, this is what it takes to build real software when I don't have anybody else on my team to look to. Now I have to step into that role of the architect. I have to build the MVP. I got to be the one that fills out the blank sheet of paper, right? And at the same time,
were you aware of this? Would you call it the fallacy of the perfect pick? Were you aware of this when you're making? Were you aware of this, or is this because this is like lessons you hear all the time in hindsight? Like, advice. If I could give advice early on, I'd do this. Were you aware of this when you're making the decision to go build a document search product? I
didn't have the label for it, but intuitively, I knew exactly what I was doing there for sure.
What mentor or influence did you have that like led you to think like that? Like, where'd that come from?
It was probably my dad, because he went to school for soil science, agricultural school. He grew up on like farm life. And then he came home and told his parents, I'm going to be a full-time musician.
Nice. Nice.
I mean, talk about like, there's no way you have a plan there. Right. It's just like, I'm just going to start working local bars, doing whatever it takes. Right. You're just kind of like, make the leap and figure it out.
Yeah,
so
I love it.
I mean, he knew like he wanted to be a musician, I guess. So there was that level of clarity that he had. But fundamentally, it's kind of the same idea, right? Because there's a lot of different subcategories inside of just being a musician. Yeah. And he started as like a songwriter, and then went to a performer with a band, and had a record deal in the LA area, toured around the Southwest, had a pretty solid following and fan base, the Tony Ryan Band. And then it ended up leading him ultimately to becoming a private guitar teacher. And that's what he's been doing for like 25 plus years now. And
man, that's awesome.
It was just,
that's cool.
One directionally correct pick at a time until you finally converge on where you want to end up.
Man, that's great. That's great. So you're building the product. They get you directionally accurate. What's that lead to?
What it leads to is me building a really, really cool piece of software that did exactly what I wanted it to do, and then realizing that nobody wanted to pay for it. Best lesson, man. Best lesson.
How long did it take you to find that out? Like, that's an okay lesson. Look, if it takes you 2 months, 6 months to figure that out, not a ton of harm. How long did we go before we realized great products, no users, no willingness to pay?
About a year and a half.
All right. All right.
That's what made it such a good lesson, honestly, for me, because the trap that I fell into, where I didn't know what I was doing, is I had no network of support at the time. I didn't know any other entrepreneurs. I just left NASA, where all my friends are like lifelong corporate engineers, essentially, right? And because I didn't know that there was even a community of entrepreneurs to tap into, my co-founder and I, he also worked at NASA at the time, we quit together. We kind of just worked in isolation. And we just thought, let's go build this thing. Let's make something really great. And then when it's done, we'll go take it to market and then figure it out. And it was something that stuck with me so strongly because it took so long to learn that lesson. Because it's like being in a dark room for a year and a half, showing the world, look what I made, and realizing, oh my gosh, nobody wants this.
Dude, yeah. I feel
never going to never going to make that mistake again.
I think it's one of these fallacies that big companies, like everyone, I think, thinks of like, quintessential Steve Jobs on the stage, here's the unveiling, 1,000 CDs in your pocket type moment. Everyone's like, let me go have that moment. We'll find the needle in the haystack of documents. And it's like, shit, we forgot this one thing, right? Make sure people are going to buy it. It's man. So like, that's a tough lesson. And I'm assuming you pretty much just flipped the order of operations as you moved into your subsequent ventures. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, the takeaway was I'm never going to start anything else without monetizing it first. Just flip the script.
Also helpful when you're 18 months into a 2-year runway, you're like, all right, now we got to find something we can sell first and then build after. Good forcing function.
Well, I mean, it was a real fork in the road moment because, I can really laugh about it now, but you can imagine at the time that was like a low point in my entire life.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe this entrepreneur thing is not the path that I want to go down. And for my co-founder, he decided that it wasn't. He was like, nope, not doing this anymore. And he went back and got a job at Google. And he's had a bunch of tech jobs since then, super successful. But I was like, I'm going to keep trying. And with the remaining money that I had in the runway, I used it to join my first ever business mastermind coaching program. And then I had about 3 months left to make enough money to be able to self-fund, paying rent and all that stuff. And that kind of gets into the next stage of the journey right there. But I wouldn't have come to that realization with the gravity that I did, right, without going through that period and realizing, wow, I don't know anything about business at all. Even my instincts weren't right. I need to get around people that do. Stop isolating myself and get a supportive environment of people who have been there around me, just like I did to develop the engineering skill, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't make that connection on the business side of things at the time because I just really didn't know what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting how I say all the time, it's hard to hear it when you're building. I say it's very important not to fall in love with the product and instead fall in love with the problem and talk to people about the problem. How does it show up? And it's just such a big risk early on that it's hard to hear. You feel like, and it's also playing to the thing you enjoy doing. It's like, I don't know the business side and it seems fuzzy and unknown, but I do know the product side and I know what I need to go build next and I'm having fun building it. So it's really easy to get like, that's where all the dopamine hits and the feeling of progress are.
Totally.
The feeling of inadequacy and imposter syndrome is all on the business side. So even no matter how many, podcasts and books you've heard about, hey, make sure you go get validation on your product is such an easy, thing. You don't do it. You don't make a conscious decision to say, hey, for the next 6 months, I'm going to do this. You just wake up on a Monday and you're like, what do I want to work on today? Ooh, it'd be fun if I built that thing. Or should I go figure out how to monetize this? Now I'll do that next week. I'll do it tomorrow. And you just kind of look up, you give an inch at a time. You look up 6 months later and you don't have the validation on the product. So it sounds like a hard-earned lesson. You join a mastermind and get around a community of people. Like what did you go start? Was that where LTV Numbers comes into play?
Not yet. Nope. Directionally
right.
correct.
What's next?
So I moved into this, this new chapter of I'm going to this business mastermind once a month, getting around a bunch of other entrepreneurs and people who were way more successful. I mean, I had no success at all to speak of, but when I mean way more, I mean talking about people with like $1 million plus a year companies, and I'm coming into that room and my mentality was, okay, clean slate. I don't know anything about what problems I should be trying to solve now, but I do know that I want to solve problems for people like these. So let me take this environment and use it as a way of just doing R&D, essentially. When people stand up to share their challenge with the group during the mastermind, what's everybody saying? And I kept hearing things related to tech at that time. So this is not LTV yet. People struggling with stuff that was easy for me, and remember, this is like 2018 now. So stuff wasn't quite as mature and ubiquitous as it is today. So people struggling with things like setting up custom domains and email automation sequences and special payment processing and all this stuff that for me was like, oh, that stuff's easy, And I heard enough of that to say, well, I should at least let everyone here know that I can do that stuff. See if I can maybe help someone out. No intent of monetizing at this point, right? Just like, well, I can solve some of those problems. That's what this group is for, right? People helping each other, sharing lessons. So I did a lot of just sitting next to people on their laptops at these events, helping them with like basic tech stuff. And I did that for enough time that I started to be known in the group as like the tech guy. And you can imagine that there probably weren't really anybody else in the group like me because this was like a pure business mastermind. There's no engineers really in the room. Everyone's like, fitness business and supplement company and online courses and all that stuff. So I really was able to carve that identity out for myself within that community. And when I was watching my runway shrink to zero, I said I had like 3 more months left in the bank. And I was like in that final month, I just got up at one of these events and said, hey, I've heard you guys mention you have a lot of challenges with tech. You can hire me. And at this point in time, I hadn't made $1 as an entrepreneur. And from that and the conversations that followed, I made like $3,000 in 7 days. And it was like, oh my gosh. What a difference, That was enough money to like cover the next month.
Yeah.
Like, wow. So that was the real light bulb moment for me of what I did there, of getting in the room, seeing what problems people had, helping where I could without any expectation of anything other than just the experience in providing that help. And then basically getting to the point where people were asking if they could work with me, and then just saying, you know what, I'm going to start taking clients. And that was the beginning of what became my second company, which was called Fit Funnel Guys. And that name came from building out sales funnels for fitness businesses. So there was a disproportionately high number of fitness businesses in that room. And I worked on that for the next 2 years. And that was really where I feel like became an entrepreneur, right? I built out sales funnels. I was inside these companies. I was making money. I had another person that I brought onto the team. So that really was a true business success for me, and a huge step in the right direction, because I was getting paid to learn so much about how these companies operated. And because I was on the inside now, I would see the follow-up questions, the sales funnel launches. And then 2 months later, they're like, hey, can you help me analyze my sales data? And this is what began the stepping stone journey towards LTV. But I'll pause right there, because that was sort of step 2.
Damn.
Cool.
Is that what so is that what led to your ClickFunnels award on the back wall there? Was that the one?
It was one of the clients that I got during that time, but this didn't happen until LTV.
Got it. Dude, that's cool.
We'll get to that.
Cool. And so it was essentially, first off, I love like the first dollar on the internet moment that you shared. I still remember mine too, right? I'm sure Johnny does too. It's like that first moment where you're like, oh man, like this can be more than just effort, right? Like there's actually a transaction here. This could be cool. We'll go figure out how to do it a million more times. So that's a great one to share. But I love each stepping stone is a new lesson to learn that leads to the next evolution of the business, right? So it's like getting in the room, seeing there's tech issues lead to setting up sales funnels lead to the second order questions, which I'm sure that's the through line of like sales metrics leading to LTV and getting that company startup, man. One of the mantras I had with my co-founder Jake in our first company was the same thing you're talking about, Tyler. It's just next right move, right? Like whatever, don't stress over all the stuff, just next right move. What's in front of me? What's the next right move? And it seems like you've really mastered that.
Completely agree. I mean, I think that was the thing that, because I was operating that way, to me, it just kept my mind in the right place to identify those things along the way, right? And not to just ignore these signals that I'm getting when I'm sitting in the room. And it's like, oh, wow, out of the 25 questions that people have brought up, like 15 of them were related to tech in some way. Maybe I could do something about that.
So fast forward us to the start of LTV Numbers. What year do you begin the product, and then walk us through the launch? It sounds like you defaulted to, hey, let's monetize this. So I'd love to take us through, when do you realize that there's a challenge to be solved here? When do you start monetizing it? And where are we at on the annual timeline?
Yep. Okay. So I started Fit Funnel Guys around 2017, 2018. And now we're like 2019. Okay. So it's been a year and a half, 2 years. And I had heard a lot of these second order questions about analyzing data now that we had solved the sales funnel problem, right? So the new problem created by the solution that we provided. And at that point in time, I really was looking for my next thing, because I wanted to get back into software. And I learned the lesson during that period of how valuable it is to precede your software with services, because you're right in the mix of things, providing real value to people who are already paying you money, who are super willing to tell you all of their other problems that they have, and super open to trying your unproven solution, right? So once I heard all these questions about data analysis, when I took a step back and sort of tried to see what the commonality was across all of them, they all had something to do with customer journeys and LTV. Because the questions were like, can you help me figure out how much I can afford to spend to acquire a customer? That's an LTV question. Can you help me figure out how many of my new customers buy my higher level program on the back end? It's a customer journey question, which is also really an LTV question. can you help me figure out how long it takes my new customers to buy something else? Customer journey question, LTV question. And when I asked them, well, like, why can't you do this now? And they said, well, we do our front end sales over here on ClickFunnels. We do our back end sales over here on Shopify. The data's all over the place. You know, we have some other things out here that we just do directly into Stripe. And you hear this like data organization challenge combined with analyzing that data across all of these different isolated platforms. So it was becoming clear to me that there was an opportunity there to solve all of those problems at the same time. And because I was looking for a software opportunity, this was clearly it to me. And it really all crystallized when I was at this event in the end of 2018. As a quick story, I was sitting in a room with about 400 other online business owners, listening to a guy named Joel Marion give a talk titled How to Scale Your Business 10 Times Bigger, 10 Times Faster. If you don't know who Joel Marion is, he started a company called BioTrust, and they scaled from 0 to 150 million in like 18 months. Just a ridiculous growth journey.
That's a ride. Wow.
Unreal. Just unreal. Yeah. So when this guy's talking about how to scale your business 10 times bigger, 10 times faster, I'm like, tell me, please. So he gets a few minutes into his talk and he asks a question to the room. He says, how many of you know your average customer lifetime value? Just a single number, average customer lifetime value. And of the 400 people in the room, there were maybe like 50 hands. There's a lot of beginners in the room too, so keep that in mind. And he goes, okay, not bad. Now, how many of you know your customer lifetime value at day 0, 30, 60, 90, and 180? And there was maybe 20 hands. Okay, not bad. Now, how many of you know your customer lifetime value at day 0, 30, 60, 90, and 180 for each product, funnel, traffic source, and affiliate that sends you customers? And there were 4 hands. And this burned into my mind because the room literally went from 400 down to 4, 1% of the room. And he asked each of them, how big's your business? 15 million, 25 million, 35 million, 50 million. And he just goes, I'm not surprised. Then he goes on to give this entire talk where the punchline of that talk was the reason why we scaled the way that we did is because we could answer that last question better than anybody else. And that's how you scale your business 10 times bigger, 10 times faster. And I was like, let's go. That's all I needed to hear because I was already seeing the analytics, the LTV thing. And he just said, that's exactly what you need to do. And then he got to the end of his talk though. And someone comes up for Q&A and says, man, this is awesome. How did you do it? And he goes, well, I hired a developer and a data scientist for $200,000 a year to answer this question. And you could hear the whole room go like, oh.
And there's one guy in the back being like, yes,
opportunity. If I could build the thing that he could have said instead of that answer right at the end of that talk, he would have had the entire room going to sign up. And
challenge accepted.
That really was like the moment where LTV Numbers started. It was that moment right there. But I couldn't have gotten to that point if I wasn't working in FitFunnel, guys, seeing those signs of that same challenge so that I could then be in that room for that talk and have the light bulb moment that really led to the start of the company.
Yeah. I love it, man. So tell us, where is LTV Numbers today? Like where are you? So it started in 2019. Okay. Where's the business at today? And has it changed the promise? It sounds like you set out to unify all these data sources, be able to answer the question of how much is your customer worth at day 0 through 180, multiple channels. Is the promise still the same? So give us a sense for what's the promise and focus now. It's a problem that you're solving, and then give us a sense for where the business is at.
Okay. So I'll start with where the business is at. So we're about 5 years in now, and I want to give the context that I wrote all of the code in the software. So I didn't have the money to hire a team. I didn't really have anyone around me that I felt like I wanted to bring on this journey with me. It's my other co-founder that would have been my first choice. He was working back at Google, didn't want to take that chance again. So I was really on my own in starting this. So I did everything, wore every hat from the beginning. So where the company's at now is we're at about 16K in MRR, but about 10 of that has come in the last like 9 months. So as of last year, it was like 5-ish K MRR. So I had this really, really long period of time where I was building the software, still doing some of the client work, and essentially working through this transition period of being 100% services, right? Fit funnel guys, to then introducing LTV numbers to some of my existing clients. And I got my first real like, okay, I'm doing this thing moment when I found one of my clients to pay me $3,000 a month to be their dedicated data analyst. And I really want to stress this point because this was another example of preceding the software with the service, just kind of doubling down on that. Because I knew that I could provide a lot of those benefits just with like Google Sheets and whatever, if I had to, right? So if I could just get someone to hire me to be the analyst, then I could essentially get paid to develop the software to make my job easier, right? So that I could then do that with more businesses. And it takes less of my time to deliver the same value. And I'm now the ultimate power user of the thing that I'm developing. So I know everything that it needs to do. I'm getting immediate feedback because I'm every week on a call sharing the results of the analysis that I did. And I was essentially doing customer-driven product development without anyone actually being a customer of the software itself. They were just a customer of me, right? And the analysis service that I was providing. So I used that $3,000 a month as like my runway for that and developing the software along the way. And eventually it got to the point where the software was good enough that I could take on another client like that. And then I could also start offering the software by itself without needing to be the analyst. And that was gradually how I moved away from Fit Funnel guys to just entirely either doing analytics services or providing the software as a service. And that's what got me through those 4 years where, like I said, my MRR was only like 5K, but I would make more money in other ways, you know, supplementing it with some services, supplementing it with some analytics work on the side.
Yeah. I'm in love with the story, dude. I'm in love with it. And I will tell you why. Sorry, Johnny. I think I stepped on you, but I just got to let this out, man.
We were going to say the same thing, bro. Go for it.
Cool. I mean, I feel like with every passing year, there's just more and more opportunity for people to bootstrap B2B SaaS companies. You know, like the CapEx keeps getting lower, but the people who struggle with it the most are the ones who want to go straight from zero to SaaS, right? They're like, I just need to build this pure thing. Services are yucky. Like, no, unless you hate money, like do the service, live, get paid to get smart, and then build the software to solve the problem that you have providing the service. Like the most useful frame for this, man, is like, and I say this all the time, Marcel says this all the time. It's think of it as a human being hiring your software to go do a job. If you use that frame, you'll never miss, right? Like people are essentially hiring LTV numbers today to provide the analytics work that you were doing for that customer for $3,000 a month, you know, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep.
And so it's just, if you think through that frame, you will always be in your customer's mind because you're just hiring the software to do the job. It's software as a service. Like it's that name actually has meaning. And I think people forget it, man. So Tyler, you smashed it. Like for what it's worth, like I feel like that's what bootstrapping a company properly actually looks like. You can do it without that and get lucky, no doubt. Plenty of people have, but by providing the service and then using the software to make the service go faster, like that's the way where you de-risk the whole thing. So just, brother, kudos. Like I love your story, man. I think it's done really, really well.
Thanks, man. It was really hard in the moment. You know?
No doubt.
I know you guys know
it's
that.
not, dude, make no mistake about it. It's not a sexy label. Like 0 to 150 million in 18 months. Now that's a sexy label.
Yeah.
Like, hey, sign me up for that.
Yeah.
But the reality, we're engineering for success, and you're engineering for the alternative is we got to go raise a bunch of money and take a huge risk. Right. And so you are de-risking the likelihood of failure by doing it over a longer period of time and building it on you in the trenches solving the problem. Like, it's very hard to build a product that doesn't work when you're hand-to-hand combat. Very easy to do it, like your first scenario, when you're in the back room coding for 18 months and it doesn't survive customer contact. Like, yeah, so much. I tell you, Tyler, like, a lot of what we teach in our early stage program is this exact concept. It's like, hey man, you got to go out. Like, it's fighting against the exact thing that what was the name of the document? Did you have a name for the product? The first product you built?
The document search.
Yeah,
it was called Jump.
Sweet. So it's protecting against the methodology that you use to build Jump and encouraging this methodology that you use to launch LTV Numbers. So I love it, man. Where is it at today? Are you able to? Are you selling the product independent of services, or is it still in this like hybrid journey of there's services up front to get it all set up and then they run on the product? Like, help us understand the customer journey into it. Are you, is it product led, service led? Hybrid?
Yep. So as of today, it is a hybrid of the two, where it kicks off with the service and transitions into the software. So we still do the integration, the setup, the onboarding, so it's like that white glove onboarding experience. But then what we do that also allowed us to really stand out from other analytics companies is we analyze the historical data of the company on your behalf, come to our first call that we call our insights call, and we have this entire report put together of findings and takeaways. And I want to stress this as a point because this is packaging the expertise developed along the way in the product and service that we provide. So it's not just like, well, we have this analytics tool now, give it to them and let them figure it out. It's like, well, hold on a second. I've analyzed now like $700 million worth of sales data. You know how valuable it is for me to give them that analysis expertise right out of the gate?
Yeah.
So that way they have massive value before they've even used the software. If I were to withhold that, in a lot of ways, I'm kind of cutting the legs out from under the software, because that's what made the software possible. And I was using that software along the way as I was providing the service. So I already know how to use the software to find out the things that matter. So why don't I just do that for them up front, so they have a really, really great foundation to kick off from?
Yeah.
So this became a true cornerstone of the experience, because analytics is one of those domains that inherently has this activation energy in the beginning of, like, many people get into it and they're just like, what now?
Yeah.
I mean, I know my way around charts and graphs, but like, I'm not a data analyst. And maybe you have the small handful of users that are, but in my case, a lot of these users are like business owners, right? Or like marketing people. So if you can tell them, like, here's what your data says, that's really the experience that they want, not to just like dig around inside of analytics software. So I've realized that has to be a cornerstone of the value proposition. But again, I wouldn't have realized that without doing the service first.
I have questions, because I love this model. And the reason I want to double click on this for a second, Tyler, is because I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast in one of two mindsets, right? Either they're offering services with their software and they're looking for best practices on how to do it, or they're not offering services with their software and they're thinking, maybe I should be, right? Mm-hmm. And so, before we got on this call, I cruised through your website, checked it out. I love it. Super simple. But one of the things that stood out to me is that your onboarding starts at $5,000, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying anything that's not on the website. So do you find that, like, does that correlate to like the type of business that can actually get a return from analytics? Like, is that also like a qualification mechanism for you? If they're not willing to put the $5,000 up, they're probably not big enough to have enough data to make it worth being a customer of yours?
100%. And think about this from like the bootstrappers mentality. In the beginning, if you just purely went for as many users as possible, right, you would eliminate a lot of these upfront barriers and just get people in the door by any means necessary. As soon as you do that, you start to really dilute your ability to extract the lessons from any individual user, because now you have, hopefully, right, like a lot of people coming in the door, but you're probably not talking to all of them. You now have larger customer support requirements, which you're probably going to be the one servicing. And where I want to focus is not on the customer support problems. I want to focus on the customer success problems. And in the beginning, that's the more valuable of the two to me.
Right.
So I would rather have fewer clients, create some barriers to entry, and also in doing that, have the clients that come on board be the ones far more likely to use it, because that's where I'm going to get the most value in learning, so I can do better with my product development from that point forward.
Well, and it solves a second order problem, I think, because in my opinion, at least, one of the hardest things from a product and software engineering standpoint to build well is your initial onboarding, especially for a technically complex product, right? We're not, just clicking a button here. You're setting up charts, setting up data streams like that. This would be a really, really, really difficult software platform to self onboard to. And so I think that by making the service a cornerstone of your activation, you also make it so you don't really have to solve that problem in the product as nearly as quickly, right?
And
you might go forever without having to solve it.
I still have not solved that problem.
Right. And you've made it a value add instead of a something that keeps you up at night, which I think is a really wonderful way to do it. Like, how are you still doing the onboarding personally? Like, is that you, or have you trained people to do that? What's your thoughts there?
Still doing it. Doing it. And this is the thing that I realized I want to hold on to as long as I possibly can. Now, I don't need to be the one to do like the technical integrations, right? Mm-hmm. But the amount of learning that I get from analyzing the business's data and having that initial call, I mean, that's where I've literally learned everything that I've learned, has been on those calls, the questions that they ask, the things that they find interesting, the things that they don't, the ways that I need to use the software to deliver the value that I want. Oh, I wish it could do this. Probably should go build that. It's really been the thing that's driven all of the development of the platform to this point in time. And what I thought was just going to be like a temporary thing of, let me have this as like a filtering mechanism. I mean, we can get into this later, but I've realized that this is actually going to be a core part of the grand vision for the company.
Yeah. It really has to be for products in this space, like data analytics. You have to get them over the hump of trusting the data. So you could try to go product-led growth, but the more janky and jacked up all their data sources are, the harder it is to get there. They just lose hope and then go back to doing it the way they were. So like you have to front load getting to the moment of value, which is giving the insight. So what's the biggest question mark? Improve that all of the work of stitching together the data sources and having better data integrity to get the insights is worth, the juice is worth the squeeze. So like, dude, I think you are absolutely on it. There's some very large data and insights companies in all types of different categories in a upfront onboarding, handheld onboarding and professional services model is like really common in that space. So I think it's to Matt's point, it's the thing that leads to the products becoming more and more capable over time. And so your retention numbers are just going to be through the roof. I think I wanted to shine the light on one thing. First off, I hope you're picking up on this, listeners. Remember the promise I said. There's something very unique and successful about the way that Tyler thinks, and that the way he structures the onboarding process is part of it. So I hope you grab that, steal it, and keep that with you as you build your companies. The point that I wanted to stress, I just lost the train of thought. Where was it? Dang it, it'll come back. Anyways, let's take, so you are, look, dude, I think in the research for this, you've analyzed over 1 billion transactions, 720 million worth of sales data, over 5.5 million customers. Can you talk to us? Like, what does it mean to be data driven in your opinion? What does it mean to be data driven?
Before I answer that, I just want to highlight the fact that all of those things that you just said are true is a huge part of what overcomes the trust obstacle when I bring new people on board. Mm-hmm. If I never did the services part, I wouldn't be able to say any of that. Mm-hmm. That really is what makes the service stand out, because many companies that are in our space, they might say like, we've had a lot of data come through our platform, But there's something different about hearing that we've personally analyzed this data and you're going to be leveraging that expertise the first time that we talk. Totally different frame coming into the relationship. So just wanted to highlight that. Okay.
Cool.
What does it mean to be data driven? I use this analogy that I think is really, it's really good visualization of how I think about this. And it's the idea of having some kind of autopilot in your car or in your airplane. When you have autopilot, the whole intent there is to make it so 99% of the little decisions are just made for you, right? Like the micro corrections to steering, the changes to your speed, the stuff that you don't really need to be involved in the decision-making process of. So 99% of those decisions taken off your plate. Let's call those the low leverage decisions. The 1% is what you're left with. And this is where your expertise really comes into play. This is, we need to change our destination altogether, or we're going to be hiring someone or launching a new product, and therefore we need to do something different. This is, there's an issue on the runway at the place that we're going to land. So me as the pilot, I need to take over and make sure we can circle around to buy ourselves some time. These are the high leverage decisions. And I fundamentally believe that as business owners, leaders, decision makers, what it means to be data driven is to let 99% of the decisions be made for you so that you can just make the 1%. And I think it doesn't usually get thought about in that way, because data, if used the right way, should just tell you what to do. It should just give you the answer. Like you don't even have a role in the decision-making process. It's just like, well, data says this, so we're going to do that. But there's a small handful of decisions where we have to bring our gut, our intuition, our research, our expertise into play, and maybe even our emotions in that case as well. But for 99% of them, all that stuff is detrimental to making the right decision.
Yeah.
So that to me is the foundation of what it means to be data driven, making 99% of the low leverage decisions for you so you can focus on the high leverage 1%.
But can you give an example of of a client that you worked with that was making that was spending time, energy, emotion, creativity, making the 99% decision? What it's like when you turn the lights on and you say, look, the data should tell you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna answer that, and I'm also going to use it to transition into this scale ceiling pyramid framework that I have, because I think it really underscores this idea, and it actually ties into this, which we opened the loop on earlier. So I had this client when I was working with the Fit Funnel guys. We built out a funnel for them, and they were really struggling to scale. They were kind of stuck in this no man's land of scale where they're sometimes profitable, sometimes not. Their customers that they're acquiring can go up and down from day to day, week to week, and they're afraid to push the gas and spend more because they don't like what they're seeing in the numbers. But here's the thing. What numbers were they looking at? Well, they were looking at number of new customers. They were looking at their ad spend. They were looking at their revenue from those customers. They were looking at the AOV on that initial sale. And what they kept seeing was that they were either barely breaking even or losing money on the initial sale. So all of their decision making was around trying to improve the ROI on the ads, because that was the data that they had visibility into. But they also weren't asking some of the questions they should have been asking at the time. So they were saying like, hey, we're losing money on the front end. Let's improve the conversion rate on the landing page. Let's try to increase our average order value by putting more upsells and things like that into the funnel. It's all the wrong questions to be asking. And it was because they didn't have the data that they needed to let the data guide. So what this would lead them to is to maybe do things like, this offer is just not working. Let's kill it. This is like the 1% up at the top of like, hey, I know the data is telling us to do these things, but like we just can't keep doing this anymore. We can't justify it. But the problem is if you don't have data visibility into the stuff that matters, you can't effectively let the data drive you. So here's what happened. I got LTV Numbers set up with this company because they were one of my first LTV clients. We realized when we got LTV set up and loaded in all of the historical data that their customer LTV went from about $25. They were selling a low ticket product on the front end, from about $25 to about $75 in 21 days. This was a complete eye-opening game changer for the decision-making process because they were comparing everything to $25. So they're like,
so 12
oh, man,
days later, they become a 70. So 12 days later, they become a $75 customer, but they're super worried about losing money on, 12 days prior.
Yes, exactly. So they were actually very profitable. They just couldn't see it. So this comes to the scale ceiling pyramid. The foundation of the pyramid is visibility. If you couldn't see that, then you could never know, right? So if you don't know, you're going to make decisions with this small piece of information when there's this much bigger picture that you're completely missing. So that's the foundation of the pyramid. You got to have visibility into the stuff that's going to drive decision making. And I fundamentally believe LTV is one of the biggest drivers for decision making. So you got to have visibility into it. On top of that, you have analysis. So once you have the visibility, how are you going to use that data to lead to the decisions? So we got visibility, and then we can analyze that data we have visibility into so that it leads to our meaningful decisions. And then on the very, very top is action. So we got visibility, analysis, action. And the action comes from acting on the decisions that you got from your data analysis. And if you don't have visibility to start, you're kind of playing the wrong game from the beginning. You're that company that's just focusing on AOV and conversion rate, blah, 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 wasting time spinning your wheels because you didn't have the visibility to let the data drive you into where you actually needed to be focusing. So that company, as soon as we had that visibility and we have the analysis of the LTV to say, hey, you could actually spend like $50 to acquire a customer. Right now you're spending $30. Guess what they did? They cranked up the scale, and next thing they knew, they had made $1 million from that funnel, and they sent me that as a thank you.
Yeah, that is cool. That's cool. So for those listening audio only, Tyler's pointing to is that a ClickFunnels?
ClickFunnels 2 Comma Club
describe
award.
what's behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, ClickFunnels 2 Comma Club award plaque, which you get for doing $1 million in sales in a funnel.
That's awesome, man. Very cool story. It's funny. It reminds me we both are sports fans, and there's certain NFL coaches that are known as analytics guys, right? They go, whatever the analytics tell them to do, they take all of the, the emotions out of it. How am I feeling? Recency bias. And it's like, nope. If the analytics say to go for it on fourth down, we're going for it on fourth down. I love it. Save the 1% for the things that really need the 1%, that need the discretion. Get the visibility and do the analysis to let the decision or the data make the decision for you.
Right. And I just want to stress that in that setup there, where most businesses miss the mark is on the visibility part. It's just they don't have the visibility in the first place to do the analysis and make the decisions. And that was where I felt like there was the biggest need in solving the problem. Visibility really is the foundation of everything.
I'd love to double click on something you said, because I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned that 99% of decisions should essentially just be see the data, make a decision, like no big deal. 1% are the ones that really require the human element, right? How do you tell the difference?
Really, really good question. This is probably the hardest question in this space. The way that I think about this is it's kind of like the sports analogy, really, which is the only way to really find out for your business which ones are the 99% and which ones are the 1 is to have a data-driven approach in a certain key area of the business, let the data drive your decisions, and then see if it worked or not. You can't answer that in isolation, Matt, is what I'm saying. You have to try it and say, oh, we used the data to inform this decision. We made the decision, turned out to be completely wrong. That must have been because you had a lack of visibility somewhere. So it creates this feedback loop where you use a data-driven approach. You realize there was a gap in it. You take that opportunity to identify the gap, fix it, have better visibility next time around so you can make a better decision. And then you iterate and iterate and iterate until most of the time the data-driven decisions are just the correct ones. But it's never going to be 100% of the time. So it is a little bit of an art. But the most important thing to take away, I think, is to get the visibility, have a decision-making process, and then let it iterate over time as you realize the gaps in it.
Yeah. Like step one, have the option. Step two, use it. And then find the 1%. I'm curious, Matt, what is your answer to that? Like you're constantly bringing more and more data into our conversations and how we run SaaS Academy and into the conversations of how we coach our clients. Like, how do you tell the difference between when to make a data-driven decision versus when to make a more intuitive one, which I think is that the two ends of the continuum here?
Yeah, I think my answer is probably saying something similar to Tyler a different way, but and everyone has different mental models, right? But for me, I look at any piece of data as essentially like a causal chain reaction, right? So you've got a thing that causes a thing, that causes a thing, that causes a thing, that causes the data that you're actually concerned about, right? It's like the sales funnel is the ubiquitous example, right? Mm-hmm. Demos on the calendar, they attended, close rate, hooray, money, right? So the way that I look at this is, for every one of these metrics, pieces of data that we're looking at, there are actions or behaviors that drive them kind of upstream of the output that we're looking at. And this comes from a lot from Amazon, right? My thinking is influenced heavily by the way that they approach their data. And in fact, also by Cedric Chin, who we just had on the podcast as well. But so essentially, like the intuitive part of this whole thing is figuring out what are the input metrics or the activities that can actually influence the output metric that you're concerned about, right? Like that's the hard part. So I think to me, like Tyler, when you say make the data-driven decision, it's essentially like doing a better job executing the hypothesis you already have. For instance, like if I say in my sales team, I call the people who book the demos, and if I call them and say the right things, that's going to positively influence my show up rate. And so if my show up rate goes down, the data-driven decision would be make sure the calls are getting done properly, audit them to make sure the scripts are correct. How long is it taking us to reach them? Do we have a capacity problem in our sales team? All the stuff that like reinforces that it's an execution problem with the current approach. And to me, like the 1% decision, to use Tyler's verbiage, is all right, check. All the stuff I already know is being done to spec, to my expectation. The input metrics I know about are being performed properly, and still the output metric is falling. My show rate's dropping 3%, and then another 2%, another 2%, and it went from 60 to 40. I need some new inputs, right? Like I need to figure out some new shit to do to move the needle on this number. And that I think is where the critical thinking comes in, where then you have to run an experiment of like, let me go try something different to put into the machine to hopefully change this number. And maybe I can stop doing something I used to be doing. So I think it's like the data-driven approach is my existing machine needs a tune-up because probably something's not getting done right. The intuitive approach is did that, machine still ain't that great. I got to go upgrade the machine. So that's the way I think about it, Johnny.
Love it. I just want to highlight in your frame there, when you come up with those action steps based on what you're seeing in the numbers, like you said, for example, we need to say this, we need to contact them within this certain amount of time. When you lay out all those additional things, oftentimes there's an additional metric there.
Yeah.
And that's the visibility piece that I was talking about. So you might say, hey, we need to contact them within 24 to 48 hours. Do you have a scorecard that shows you how long it took you to reach out? How many were within 12 hours? How many were 12 to 24? So on and so forth. So that's the visibility iteration part that I was alluding to.
Yeah, dude, your pyramid's perfect, right? Because I mean, like without the visibility, you're just taking shots in the dark. The interesting thing that's a newer revelation for me that I learned from a few of these different guys is also though, like instrumenting not just for is the activity being done and like how long does it take to get it done, which are the ones that most of us provide visibility for, but also in a more manual sense, is it being done right? Because especially on things that are the human experience, people making phone calls, people saying things, like there's no substitute. Yes, AI is getting better. This is probably a temporary statement, but at least as of today, there's no AI that I would trust to like analyze a sales call more than a really good sales director, like that kind of thing. And so it's this fascinating thing where you could go 12 weeks downrange on something, on this theory of like, let me get an SDR to call these people who are supposed to be showing up. And without actually auditing the calls to figure out like what's being said and is the thing that I said they should say actually being done properly, you could go downrange 3 months and be like, called everyone. call them within 10 minutes. Guess this calling people thing doesn't work without actually doing the grunt work of auditing the calls every couple of weeks, spot checking stuff. And like, is the system you designed actually being done properly? I think that's the harder thing to instrument for visibility because it's more manual, but it's also just like this crazy thing where all the easy numbers can look super green. But if you don't actually audit the humans, you could have built a machine that never actually saw the light of day because the thing that you said should have been done never got done right. And then you're 3 months downrange, no closer to solving the problem than you used to be.
So let me give you a data-driven corollary to that, because I've been seeing this a lot more as well. And it's this concept that you call paired metrics, which basically means that one metric by itself doesn't tell the full story. You need a pair of metrics that together allow you to tease out exactly what you just said. So there is some cases where you can truly capture that as a metric. There's other ones where to your point, you kind of just need to do some manual review and then maybe in that review create a metric. Like, I score this on a 1 to 5 scale, for example. But a really good common use case on this is, let's say you have a customer support team and one of your core metrics is how many tickets did you resolve in like a time period, right? Well, that could be super misleading if all of those customers are super unsatisfied. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like pairing the number of tickets with like average customer review score on that interaction, right? That's the pair that allows you to derive the meaningful insight. So it comes back to visibility, right? Do you have the pair?
Yeah. Johnny, actually, I stole this turn of phrase from Johnny. He's right here, so I got to give him credit. But anyway, you've called it, Johnny, like two numbers that are in tension with one another, right? And so like Tyler, your example is beautiful, right? Because essentially, like, sure, one support rep could handle 300 tickets a day, but it probably ain't going to be very good, right? And so like that number would go up, but it would cause the other one to go down, and then that same number of cases per rep. Right. There's like this inverse relationship, and it's really, you're trying to build a continuum to make sure neither side gets too far out of whack from one another. Yeah, I love it. Oh man, Johnny, you just dropped the bait for two nerds to get into this conversation. I don't know how much time
I know. I'm sitting here wondering, how can I intervene? We're in the deep end of data analysis,
man. You'll make me right. I'm talking about sports. That was great though.
So Tyler, take us into the company building mode. I'm curious, where's LTV numbers go from here? What are you focused on? And what do you see coming up over the next 12 months?
Well, what I really see truly comes back to the way that the company was built from the beginning and all the things that I've learned in doing it that way, which is what I used to think was a services company that was going to transition to just pure SaaS. It's been on these calls and having the conversations with the customers that have led me to realize the experience that our customers are truly seeking. And that experience, I would actually call analytics as a service. It's not actually to use the software and look at the graphs and set the filters and configure this and configure that. They just want to be told what the data says. That is the end goal. What does the data say? Comes back to the data-driven framework. And really, it comes back to the way that business owners think, right? I mean, you guys could probably both agree with this right here on the spot. You don't want to spend your time looking at the data and looking at the graphs. You want to be given the insights and the takeaways. Would you agree?
Yeah, dude, I say it all the time in the context of customer support. Like, they don't want to talk to you. They just want their problem solved.
Right.
That's all it is.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
And it's the same thing with data-driven decision making. It's like the more you can reduce the amount of time and effort required to get to the insight, the better. So what I've realized is that, yes, I had to build a lot of this foundational capability to analyze data. But for a lot of business owners, their perfect world experience is that they never actually even use the tool at all. They just get told what the data says. Now, there's a lot of things that need to happen to get there, and there will be a lot of intermediate steps along the way. But what I've realized first and foremost is the experience I'm providing with those insights calls, that needs to be a cornerstone of the service on an ongoing basis,
Yeah.
meaning we could literally just be your analyst as a service. We're
Yeah.
going to use our software behind the scenes. And also, if you want to just use the software, you totally can. But a core offering is going to be this analysis as a service. And when you think of it that way, it has this really great long-term product development forcing function, which is at some point, couldn't the software kind of do that too? Couldn't it also analyze the data on your behalf, find some of these insights, and tell them to you proactively? Yeah, it probably could, especially with the rise of what's going on with AI.
Well, then at that point, Tyler, you just keep better and better margins on your service. You use it for you.
Well, but this is the thing though, because I've thought a lot about this, and that's why I don't mind saying this publicly. The competitive advantage at that point would come from how good your analysts are. It doesn't even matter if you made the software publicly exposed, because what's going to make the software do its job well is how good the analysts were that fed the intelligence of the software. So I've realized that right now I'm kind of like the super user, right? I've analyzed all of the data. I have 100% context. No one can use this software better than me. But if I end up with a team of 20 analysts that are like 80% as good as me at analyzing the data using the software, and they're helping inform what else the software needs to do, and we're capturing our brains and our way of thinking into the way that the software does its own analysis, the day will come where the software can kind of stand alone. And that to me is like the grand vision. Is I sit down at my desk, I have a little device like this sitting on my desk, and I say, hey, data, what do I need to know? That to me is the ultimate experience. And in thinking in those terms, it makes the reverse engineered pathway to get there super clear. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Dude, very cool. Very cool. I think your point is well made on, we don't actually want the data. We want the insights from the data. One of my favorite vendors that we use takes our monthly financials. Once our books are closed, they do the analysis. They run it through a model that they've written a book out. You can buy into their methodology as a whole. So you probably have somewhere in you a book on how you how you analyze your model for analyzing e-commerce data. So if you want to just teach it, the analysts out there in the world, the in-house ones, could read it and be like, oh man, this is a great model. But this company that we use has a book. It's Grave Crabtree's Simple Numbers 2.0 is the book. And then they have a service where you say, hey, if we buy into that model, you can send your closed books, and then they'll send back to you the analysis, the data itself. But the really powerful part is an hour monthly call where they tell you what they're seeing based on the models. They have no insights into like what's happening in the business. They're just like, hey, here's how labor costs were affected. Here's how your sales costs were affected. Like just across the board, give you some insights. So I think you're right on point. At least from my perspective, it sounds awesome. It'd be what I want. Matt probably loves tinkering around with the data, but never be able to get him fully out of the spreadsheets. He likes that part. But yeah, I love the insights. Like, tell me what I need to know so I can go focus on execution. So very cool, Tyler.
Hey, I'll give you just a point of view on that, Johnny, because it's not all about the spreadsheets for me. Like, yes, I love tinkering with the data, but to Tyler's point, I put a very high importance on objective third-party analysis, right? Like, I'm very close to the data. Most of the data changes, the good ones or the bad ones in our business, are downstream of decisions that are made by Johnny Page and Matt Verlack, right? So we also have the way that we see them and the context we see around them. And so the biggest thing that I actually get from those calls is someone who's looking at our business as a spreadsheet, not as something that our work and the quality of our decision making is tied up into. It's like, look, the numbers don't have feelings. Like, they're just the numbers. This is what the data is telling me. It's either correct or it's incorrect, but this is the trend. And it's just that clear, objective analysis without all of the head trash that every entrepreneur ties to their numbers and their business. Like, there's a huge ROI on just having that. And so I think that's, to me, at least a big part, Tyler, of what you also provide is just the fact that, like, you're not tied up in their success or failure, right? It's just the analysis. It's just the numbers. This went up, this went down. Here's what I think you should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really at its core is what data-driven decision making is all about.
Yeah.
And, to kind of put a bow on a lot of this discussion, you can't do any of that stuff if you don't start with visibility. And you don't realize what you need visibility into until you leverage what you have, make decisions from it, and then see where the gaps are. And so for many businesses where being data-driven feels like an intimidating step, it doesn't have to start with nailing the visibility the very first time. Come back to that story that I told earlier of that company that was kind of beating its head against the wall with scaling that offer. They were running into that wall and making decisions based on limited visibility. And it became very clear because I was able to bring that perspective of, hey, are you sure you guys are seeing the full picture here? Because if you saw what happened after the customer was acquired, you might be making very different decisions. Mm-hmm. And just having that voice in the room, and maybe it can be you right now, of, hey, we're trying to make a decision about this, but each time we've made this decision in the past, it doesn't really seem to be producing the outcome that we're expecting. That's usually a sign that there's a visibility gap. And if you can start with that framework in your mind of get the visibility to improve the analysis so we can make better decisions, improve the visibility so we can do the analysis to make better decisions, that's really all it takes to get started being a more data-driven company. Because being data-driven is not like you either are or you aren't. Right? It's how data-driven are you? And you got to start with what you have. Leverage it, see where it breaks, and then improve.
Great points, Tyler. I'd love to shift gears a little bit because I think you've just had you've got a 9-month-old at home. You entered a new season of life. Like we talked about the Tyler that was grinding it out at his parents' house, saving up a bunch of money to get runway. Matt and I are familiar with the hours and effort put into getting a business from 0 to 1. And you did it not once, but you did it 3 times before you got to a point where you are today with LTV Numbers. I want to talk a little bit about this term we call the integrated life. Like at SaaS Academy, our focus is not on just supporting a winning founder in the business, but on supporting a winning human, right? That there's a whole part of Tyler that shows up as a dad and as a husband and as a friend. And I'd love to just click on what have been some of the highs and lows and lessons you've learned as you fight for. I know that those are values that are super important to you as well. And I'd love to know what are some of the mindsets and lessons learned along the way as you fight for that balance and integration between all the areas that you aim to show up as a 10 out of 10.
Yep. In this new stage where there's a baby now, and it really forces you to focus on leverage, I think, more so than anything else. Because the thing that you lose some of in terms of like the currency that you have to play with is time, right? You just don't have as much of it as you did before. And you can't just smash the work more hours button over and over and over again, right? Once there's a baby that you want to be a part of their life and you want to be present for, and also they're going to decide a lot of the time when you can work and when you can't, you got to plan around that from a leverage standpoint. And one of the things that I've heard as a consistent theme with many of the entrepreneurs I know who became parents is that they all became better entrepreneurs after they had their first child. And I see you guys nodding your heads. And it begs the question of like, well, why? Because you didn't learn anything new, right? It's not like you got smarter. In fact, you're probably operating at a mental deficit because you're sleep deprived half the time, right? So what is it? To me, it's just the realization that time is so precious and you need to figure out how to spend it on the stuff that really matters. So I had to completely rework my schedule, as no surprise, on when I do work and when I don't. And I had to really create those strict boundaries around where work begins, where work ends. And that's forced me to really think about, from a leverage standpoint, what's going to be the single highest leverage input that I can put into the business to get the most output. And for me, because I've been in this bootstrapped entrepreneur journey for so long, I've realized how much of what I'm spending my time on is just low leverage stuff that I shouldn't be. And, obviously this is like a huge Dan Martell axiom of buying back your time and really taking that seriously. I mean, having a baby is the strongest forcing function I can think of to doing that. Yeah. So, whether it's hiring a nanny like we did to be able to create some structured hours where I can do focused deep work, but then also to deciding what I spend my time doing during that period. Am I writing social media posts? Am I doing customer support? You start to list out all these things and realize, if I only have this many hours, I need to spend it here and here, because that's going to be the two things that give me the most leverage in growing the business. And so I think just really leaning into that and embracing it, which for me has been going on podcasts. It's been speaking to our highest end clients and learning about what they want the software to do and what they wish it could do. And it's been, because it is still mostly just me from a team perspective right now, it's been only doing the things on the software side of things that are strictly necessary, that are going to move the customer experience forward, that are going to allow us to charge more, that are going to open the doors to new clients that we couldn't bring in before, instead of just like tinkering on little cool features that before I might have just, spent a week on, because why not? So all of that has been, I think, the biggest takeaway for me.
Dude, I love it. You've actually shared a couple forcing functions for growth in our conversation today. One of them is having a kid, right? It's like a very clear new constraint for most people. Hey, I've got the values. Like, I'm not willing to concede in either area. I'm not setting down the ambitions of what LTV Numbers is going to grow into, and right. I'm not setting down the ideals I have around what it looks like to be the dad and husband that I want to be. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that can change is I got to get better. So you shared that. I love, having a kid is a huge forcing function to building more leverage, but so was leaving the job without the clear what's next. Let me just take the next step. It's a lot of people say they want growth, but they don't like the uncomfortability that comes with the taking the step and being stretched. And that's what having a kid does. It's a forcing function of like, oh my God, I never knew I could be this tired and have this little time, and I still got to get the thing done. There's a really uncomfortable first couple of months where you're like, all right, I got to lean into this, but you start to gain a new homeostasis. You're like, oh, okay, I got a new normal. I can deal at a whole nother level. And that's hey, if you don't like that game, then you should punch out now and go get the job at Google, go get the job at, that's like, that is the label on this journey. It never ever ends, whether you are running $1 billion company, $1 million company, or you're starting from zero. It is a series of that. Oh my gosh, is a new uncomfortable. And I think that having a kid is just a very easy moment to realize, when did that start for me? And I think your mindset and approach prior to having a kid sets you up to, handle this season of life really well. And I got no doubt there's another one just around the corner, a new layer of leverage and an impact that you'll lean into. So love it, man. Appreciate the share on that.
Absolutely. And I would just say as well that I think as much as possible as entrepreneurs, we want to learn the lesson without the scar as much as we can, right? And having a kid obviously is like about as strong of a forcing function as you can get. But that doesn't mean that, if that's not on the horizon for you, or that's something that you're not planning to do, that you can't still take that same lesson and find other ways to create that forcing function.
Yeah.
That could be, for example, joining a business mastermind. It could be getting a coach, getting a mentor, someone that holds you accountable. But to your point, what they're all going to have in common is pushing yourself into an area of some kind of discomfort where you have no choice but to adapt. And I think too often, as maybe like before making the jump or super early stage entrepreneurs, it's scary to truly make it so you have no choice but to adapt. And so you just don't leap quite far enough. You're always playing it just safe enough that you can kind of get away with doing things the way that you've always been doing them. And it just hamstrings your ability to grow so much. So I just want to really highlight that you can create those forcing functions at any stage. You just have to be intentional and willing to create it so that you have no choice but to adapt. That can be a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. Man, I'd love to shift gears to one final note before we wrap up here. At SaaS Academy, we say, and when we hire our team, the vision that we constantly come back to go back to the NASA example earlier, is we exist to help founders find their perfect exit. And for some, that means that they actually exit the company, they sell it, and they have life-changing financial outcome, and they go on to go do the next thing. For others, that means that they were the only person writing software, and now they get to hire a team, and they're out of the day-to-day. So there's like operational exits, there's business exits, et cetera. So there's a process of defining what that is for you. But I'd love to know this whole how we met, the way we interact on a regular basis is under the vision of creating your perfect exit. So like, what does that look like for you? What do you build in LTV numbers? Like why go through the process of being stretched and building more leverage? And what do you hope this turns into?
From a business standpoint, because I really do think about it this way, the mission of what is today called LTV Numbers and the vision of the company that I want it to become in the future, it's really evolved so much because of how closely I've been, I think, to the customer and to the customer experience. It used to be to answer the question, how much can I spend to acquire a customer better than anybody else? Because that was sort of like the simplest version of that question.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's to make being data-driven accessible to anyone. That is a vision that gets me so excited. It draws on all of my past experience. It draws on all of my past life in being an analyst, in being a software engineer, in being someone who was comfortable in the numbers, but who has, over the course of 6-7 years, forced himself to learn business and realized that everyone who's in business just wishes that being data-driven was easier, because everyone wants to be data-driven. It's just a matter of, can I, or to what extent am I? And making being data-driven accessible to anyone is a vision that gets me so incredibly excited. And for the first time ever, as of earlier this year, when I realized that, I can see LTV Numbers becoming a company that I run for the rest of my life. And now I don't know that I will. Who knows? But directionally correct. I'm playing the infinite game. And I really think that this company could meaningfully change the world of business, because being data-driven is hard. It's very hard. And to me, it's a problem that I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to tackle. And I'm willing to think in decades and not days and put in the time required to meaningfully solve this problem. And so I know that if I can do that, the company that I can create will create the business life that I would like to create, which is leveraging data, analytics more accessible to anyone, and allowing people to have those aha moments around leveraging data inside their business. And I also know that this business can be so big that it can create anything that I want in my life, for my family, for the type of life I envision for my kids, and the places that we can go in the world, and the things that we can do, and the freedoms that we can have. I can see all of it living inside of that vision of building this company, which I see being called data-driven. LTV Numbers becomes data-driven as this vision ultimately starts to come to fruition. And man, Is that exciting to me.
I love it, man. Go scoop that domain quick.
I have trydatadriven.com.
Nice. I love it. Dude, Tyler, I said it from the first, and I mentioned it a couple of times here today, man. We have this saying, we say winners are going to win, and we get to work with a lot of people. And a lot of our mission is to help the people who potentially don't have the winning mindsets or the habits and support to be winners. I meant it from the first time we met, man. I think you're a winner, whether it's going to be, I'm after a thorough conversation, I'm really confident data driven becomes a thing, man. I can feel your passion and excitement around it. So just appreciate you coming on here and talking a little bit about what drives you to to operate the way you do. I think there's so much around your mindsets and habits that others can learn from, and dude, just super excited to be along the journey and supporting you as you do some pretty exceptional stuff in the business and just the way you operate in the family life. So thanks, man, for taking the time to come on and shine your light. We'll have you back on. I can't wait. Let's aim for like 6-12 months from now. Love to have you on again and get some updates on where LTV Numbers is at, but big things coming for you and the business ahead. Matt, anything else to add?
No, this was a super fun conversation. Thanks for letting us nerd out for a minute there, Johnny Page, sports guy. That was a great chat on
we'll do a SaaS Academy Underground podcast where you guys can go and just like pull out the spreadsheets, visual only. You can get into it.
I love it.
This is great. Tyler, where I know you got socials. We'll link it up in the show notes, but like if someone's looking to learn more about LTV Numbers and the services you guys provide, like where can they find you?
You can go to ltvnumbers.com to see everything about that. And then I'm on Instagram at Tyler_LTV Numbers, regularly posting content about being data driven, leveraging LTV, and using it to grow a business impactfully.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. Good chatting.
Hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate you guys.